All right, what's up, everyone? It's Zach, and today I'm here with a very special guest. I am here with Emily Taylor. Emily, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Zach. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking, and thanks for taking some time to be here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, to those of you listening, Emily is a college instructor and she does content creation. She's also very passionate about football, more specifically the Oregon Ducks. And something that I really like and admire about Emily is that she's all about kindness and positivity with her social media and the content that she puts out there. So, I just thought that that's really cool. And it's something that definitely resonates a lot with me. But that's a little bit about Emily from kind of like a service level. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your background, who you are, what you're doing, all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. You summarized it pretty well. I am absolutely passionate about football. As especially college football, but definitely the Oregon Ducks. So this is, of course, my favorite time of the year. But in conjunction with that, I do have the pleasure of teaching at the college level, which has always been a passion of mine as well. So I feel very grateful to be in a position in which I can teach on a subject that I absolutely love and completely back up. And I always am blessed with like all these amazing students and opportunities. And when it comes to like service opportunities, teaching, and research.
That is awesome. And you mentioned that you're teaching. What subject are you teaching currently?
Yeah, absolutely. So I teach communication studies, which is pretty broad because it
Yeah.
touches on so many different concentrations. But my concentrations have always been interpersonal relationships, media studies, and health communication.
Okay. Very cool. And it sounds like, honestly, the kind of area of communication seems pretty relevant, especially within the last few years with everything going on in the world.
Absolutely. I feel like communication studies in general has just shot through the roof in regards to everything that has been going on in the last few years. So there's
Hmm.
been so much material, there's been so much knowledge, so many things have been put out there that just kind of have brought in what we can study, what we can talk about, what we can teach about. So, although a lot of what has happened has been extremely negative, analyzing that and kind of bringing it into dialogue and discussion, either within research or within the classroom, has been extremely productive and
Yeah.
super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting knowing that you teach communication studies because I think back to when I was in undergrad. Um, I guess like the day that you go up and get your schedule picked out and all that good stuff, get your textbooks. The people that were helping me were like, okay, you have to take a communications class. You should take it your first semester. And I'm sure a lot of universities and colleges they encourage you to take communications early or like you have to take it for a credit. But I think like a lot of people kind of underestimate how important communication courses actually can be for us as we develop and kind of become our own people.
Yeah, absolutely. It is pretty standard with any kind of university. Like you
Hmm.
usually have to take a communication class. Usually it's public speaking, but
Right.
sometimes it's beyond that. But you bring up a really good point because I feel like every semester I come across students who are in my classes and they're like, I actually had no idea classes like this existed
Mm.
under communication studies. This is so relevant and applicable to my life and kind of what I'm studying and what I'm majoring in. So I feel like it's kind of not discussed enough in a sense of just how broad the subject is. And it does go beyond like public speaking or like COM 101. There's
Right.
actually a bunch of different and interesting concentrations, which, if you're not a COM major, it's understandable that you're not necessarily seeing all of that. But you kind of do have this opportunity to choose which one best fits you as an individual or you, depending on what you're studying and majoring in.
Exactly. And it's pretty cool because over the last 2 years I was in grad school to my MSA, Masters of Science in Administration.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
yeah, thank you. Are you familiar with the MSA? I know it's not as popular of a degree, but have you heard of it?
Oh, I have heard of it. Yeah,
Okay,
I don't
cool.
know. I don't know a bunch of details about it, but I've absolutely heard of it.
Okay, awesome. So to anyone listening who maybe isn't as familiar with it, the best way I describe it is very similar to an MBA, which I'm sure everyone knows an MBA. Big difference is MBA is a lot more kind of like numbers, analytical accounting focused, where MSA is more people focused, more interdisciplinary. So in my master's coursework, instead of taking a lot of like heavy accounting and finance classes, I was taking a lot of classes on communication within the business world or communication between different generations or different backgrounds. And that's when I was like, wow, I've always thought communication was cool, but I didn't really see how I'm as some master's in human resources, I was like, I don't really I didn't really think that I'd have those take communications courses, but having taken them, it's like, wow, that makes such a difference, and it's really helped me in my career and just mature as a professional and personal, throughout this journey.
Wow, that's really cool. And that's really awesome that you had the freedom to kind of take those types of classes within that degree.
Yeah, definitely. So, Emily, I'm curious, with your passion for communications, studies, the subject itself that you teach, what got you interested in communications in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I feel like many college students, when I started off, I thought I knew what I wanted to do. And then I got to college and my mind was open to all of these different majors and all of these different opportunities and different things that I could study. And I was taking many classes that I didn't even think about before I entered college.
Mhm.
So I actually took a communication class. It was like an introduction to communication class the same semester that I took public speaking. And it's not that I loved public speaking, but I loved my teacher that I had, and I loved the introduction to communication class. And that kind of opened my mind to the idea of like, oh, I should really explore this more, and like, what can I do with this type of degree? So it remained obviously relatively broad, but
Mhm.
I declared as a communications studies major just because I loved the content and I loved the information that I was receiving in all of my classes. And I figured that along the way, I would figure out what I wanted to do. So, around the second half of my undergraduate, I had the opportunity to start a master's program in communication studies. It was like a dual thing, so I could finish my undergraduate and start my master's.
Okay.
And I was really trying to still figure it out, but grad school had always appealed to me because I just have like this natural love of education and learning. And so I entered that program. And again, I really was falling in love with the classes, but also the instructors and professors I had were absolutely amazing and inspiring. And my mom had always raised me to like, you were put in the world to make a difference in the lives of others and to, kind of cultivate that kindness. And I was just constantly inspired by these professors and felt that they were kind of making a difference in my life. And that's when the light bulb really went off like, oh, I've always loved education. I think teaching would be awesome. And if I could teach the subject that I really love and feel passionate about, I feel like that would be the icing on the cake. Like, this is like what I want to do. So I took time in my master's to really, get involved in research because I knew that was so important going into a PhD program, as well as kind of building up the resume in regards to other opportunities I could do that would better prepare me for a PhD program. And then after I graduated with my master's, I was able to teach for a little bit before going off to do my PhD. And just there's those little opportunities along the way that really solidify that this is what I wanted to do, be a part of, and this is kind of where how I wanted to make my difference.
I absolutely love that. That's such a great journey and story, and I think back to just my at all levels of my academic journey, and when you come across those teachers or professors that really care about what they're teaching, and they just have a passion for education and learning, it just makes such a difference. And I mean, obviously, like, I never, was one of your students or anything, but I think back to all the professors I had that made an impact on me, and I can't thank them enough. So, I mean, I'm sure that whether you even know it or not, so many students you've probably impacted that are just grateful for, that one course they took, or that, time in office hours where you really helped out with something, or helped steer them in a direction. So I think that education, that's so important, and to the educators out there like yourself, you just have such a great opportunity to really impact people's lives on such like a meaningful way. And that's, I think, why I've always just had a lot of respect and passion for the field, because it's just such a unique kind of position to be in.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, it
Yeah.
is a unique position to be in. And honestly, educators, I mean, I completely admire like preschool through 12th grade educators because that's really where it starts. Because
Yeah.
when I started on this journey, like I could really pinpoint back to amazing, inspiring teachers I had,
Hmm.
even in elementary school. And I was like, wow, that really started then. Like you fostered my admiration for education, and you made me love to read and write, and you really made it easy for me to just love to learn. And I don't think I'd be where I am today if I didn't have teachers like that.
Yeah,
So, like, it's such a unique position to be in regardless of the level. But definitely, I mean, that K through 12 is just like so important,
it is.
and what they do is absolutely amazing. And I know that definitely had a difference on me, so that's really kind of inspiring in itself for me to kind of continue doing what I do.
Yeah, I love it. And Emily, you're mentioning how kind of you've had, I would say that your path to where you've gotten to now, you've done a lot of great things and you've had a lot of great experiences and accomplishments. And you mentioned in undergrad, kind of having that like ability to, I guess, dual enroll, if you will, while doing your master's and finishing up. Um, so it sounds like you've always had good success, or maybe would be quote unquote like a high achiever with what you've done. And to be teaching in front of college students too is definitely a big accomplishment. During your journey, did you ever have any moments of like that kind of imposter syndrome of like, what am I doing? Or like, why would a student like want to listen to me? Or did you ever have any of those moments? Or
Oh, absolutely.
okay,
When I graduated with my master's, I was relatively young. I mean, let me think. I was 22 years old
okay,
when I graduated with my master's, because I had just I finished everything relatively quickly,
right.
and I graduated high school early. So I would feel like that. I think that's the first moment I absolutely felt that imposter syndrome, because I'm like, I don't feel like I belong here. Am I qualified? Like, I know I'm qualified based on like what I've been taught, and what I have proven to the university that I'm teaching at. But that definitely is kind of when it hit me. But I think teaching and continuing to teach really helped me work through that. And then I would say the second like biggest phase of that imposter syndrome would be when I entered my PhD program, probably because I had like taken a year off to teach, so I wasn't like in my mojo of being a student.
Yeah.
But in conjunction with that, like within that type of degree program, I was doing research and teaching and kind of, progressing as like a professor in my skill. And so I think like all of those different elements like really had me questioning things like, am I good enough to do
Hmm.
research? Am I good enough to like teach and do research and like have all of these juggling responsibilities, even though I love all of them? I definitely had moments such as that. And then probably like as I was doing my dissertation, I definitely had moments where I was like, this is it.
Oh
Like, this is
yeah.
the final thing that I'm doing. And I don't know, like, am I ready to graduate,
Right.
and am I ready to like do this research and like publish it and graduate and be done and actually have the PhD? So I think it's constant. I think it comes in phases, but I don't know
Yeah.
if that will ever stop.
Yeah.
Like
That's a really good point, and it's really interesting to hear your journey because I think about my own where I graduated from undergrad in 2018. I was 22. 2018 I graduated, and then worked professionally a couple of years, and then 2020 is when I went back to grad school. So I had like a 2-year gap, and that imposter syndrome was massive. So it's kind of similar to how you said like you took a year off and you just come back to school and like for you it was your PhD. For me, it was my master's, but I was just like, oh my gosh, like, do I even know how to read a text anymore? Like,
right?
do I even belong here? Like, I have to like APA 7 this
Right.
article or something. Like, it's like I
Absolutely.
don't
And I
know if
think
I
it
can do
totally
this.
shifts like with your time management and organization. You have to
Yeah,
be like really organized again with
right.
deadlines and what's expected of you. And it's to not think like that for so long and then to go back to that. It's like, wait, am I like even prepared for something like this? There's quite an adaptation like process to go
Yeah,
through.
there is. And it's interesting because like for me, so I was 20 24 when I went back for my master's, and that was after 2 years of working full time, a couple different jobs and whatnot. And I feel like those jobs, kind of like that full time being thrown out to the real world, it made me grow and learn a
Mhm.
lot of lessons, some harder than the other. Um, so I feel like when I started at 24 and then finished up at 26, like I feel like that just gave me a much different perspective than if I just went straight into a master's out of undergrad, and like trying to tackle that and time manage at like 22. I feel like that would just be like such a different mindset.
Oh, absolutely. I remember
Yeah.
when I was in my master's program, my
Yeah.
advisor had told me, like, hey, you might want to, because I wanted to go straight through to a PhD program. And
Okay.
he was like, you might want to consider, like, just maybe taking a year or two to teach. And I
Yeah.
thought that idea was atrocious. Like, I was so close-minded. I was like, no, I want to be a student more. Like, I want to get this going, get this done. And he's like, well, take some time to think about it. And when I was in my last semester of my master's, I was pretty burnt out. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do more school right now. Like maybe teaching for a year or two wouldn't be such a bad idea. And honestly, I wouldn't have had it any other way because I feel like I developed as a teacher and as someone in academia so much in that time before going off to my PhD program that I think I was a better PhD student because of that like teaching time that I had where I was just teaching and wasn't worried about being a student at all. Plus,
Yeah.
it gave me time to not be burnt out. So
Right.
I think it was necessary on many levels. And I'm so grateful that that's the way it happened. But yeah, you're absolutely right in a sense of like, there's an adaptation process, but
Hmm.
there's so much growth that can be done in taking a break before moving on.
Yeah. And I mean, to anyone listening who might be at that point where they're considering grad school or considering PhD or wherever they might be in the journey, I think this is a good kind of like maybe stop and reflect moment of like, don't feel the pressure to go right into grad school or to the next level program. Cause I think like when I was considering it out of undergrad, a lot of people said like, "Oh, if you don't do it now, you're gonna say you'll do it in a year, but then like 5 years will go by and you wouldn't have started it yet." So it's kind of like you have to get it like the ball's already rolling, going. But
Right.
I think, like you were saying, Emily, like, I remember at the end of undergrad, I was burnt out. I was like, "Geez, I don't know if I could do this again." So, like, just getting that clarity and coming back, and I think, like, having that life experience helped, and, I was fortunate to go to grad school, and I was also a graduate assistant, so I was doing research, I was working, I was a full-time student, and I having professional experience and having to balance, like, a full job with family, friends, significant other, all that stuff, like, it just helped me be able to juggle all those as a grad student. Whereas, like, if I went responsibility in undergrad to that, I would've been like, "Oh my gosh, what is this?"
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that's very well said.
definitely. So, with your PhD program, how long was that?
It was 4 years.
Okay,
Yeah. So, I mean, typically it takes anyone about 4 to 7 years to
right.
complete a PhD program in my field. So, like within communication studies,
Okay,
other disciplines and other concentrations can absolutely vary. But yeah, it took me 4 years.
okay. And then with you doing your undergrad and master's at the same time, you did that in 4 years as
I
well?
did that in five
5
years.
years, okay,
So both degrees in 5 years.
okay,
Yeah.
gotcha, okay. Yeah, that's a lot of education.
It is a lot of education when you sit back and do the math like that, which I don't think I've done in a really long time.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, this might sound cliche, but it flew by. Like it went
Yeah, I'm
by
sure.
so quickly, even with like that break in the middle. It went
Mhm.
by so quickly. I feel like my PhD program flew by. I know I definitely didn't feel like that when I was in the middle of it.
Yeah,
But it like looking back, I was like, wow, 4 years already. Like that's insane. Like
right.
went by so quickly. But that was honestly like a really great opportunity for me. And I grew so much within that program that I wouldn't take it back at all.
When you were finishing up your PhD, and I know dissertations are a beast of their own, so I can imagine that was a fun time, but, like, towards the end of your PhD, were you feeling kind of like that similar level of burnout that you kind of mentioned earlier? Or, like, if you had to have gone for, like, another year or 2, do you think you could have, or would it been really difficult?
No, I think I was definitely at a point of
Okay,
burnout. I
yeah.
was really, I think the dissertation, like you said, was such a beast.
Yeah.
And, my final year of just working completely and solely on the dissertation, I was burnt out of that because
Mhm.
I just wanted it to be done. And I
Yeah.
was tired of like the roadblocks I would hit and, writing the same paper for like a year plus. I was kind of just over it, even though I absolutely loved like what I wrote on and I loved the areas of concentration I was able to tie into it. But I was pretty burnt out. So I think I was definitely at that point of burnout, but when it came time for like the final defense, like this was it, like I was gonna
Mhm.
defend it and I was gonna either pass or not. I started feeling those like I was feeling like kind of a little sentimental, like, oh wow, like this is it. Like
Yeah.
I made it here. I'm exhausted. I'm so over this like giant paper, but like this is it. Like for 4 years I've worked to get to this point. And so I think I had moments of that. And then I had moments of like worry where I was like, how am I going to feel after this? Because
Yeah.
I've been a part of this program and have been working towards this for the last 4 years. Like, do I remember what it's like to not be a PhD student?
Right.
So there was a lot of like mixed feelings going on there towards the end. And those all just got completely wiped out the moment my defense came and I passed and it was done. And then it was just pure joy. And it's kind of like the burnout was just it just faded away.
Right.
All those worries, especially regarding like identity and everything, those kind of just faded away. And I was just able to like look back on that and be like, oh yeah, I did that. That's really cool. And now I can go and do what I've worked hard to do and what I've been wanting to do. And that there's something that's like really empowering but also really joyful about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to kinda summarize the experience. I think it's just, like, it's so much, like, you know, like they say, blood, sweat, and tears that you pour into something like that, but it's like, it's it's so empowering to be able to step back and be like, "I did that."
Right.
And, like, I guess, again, I mentioned I'm not a number statistics person, but, like, if you look at the statistics, it's like the amount of people that, you know, go to college in the first place. That's a statistic, and then it kinda gets a little slimmer when you talk about, like, graduating with a bachelor's, then with a master's, then a PhD, so it's like, the higher up you go, the more you're like, "Wow, I'm, like, one of X amount that have done this." It's such a big accomplishment, and it's kind of like that weird, like, overjoy, but also, like, "What the heck did I just go through?" Like, "What happened?"
Right. Yeah. It's kind of
Yeah,
like, what did I just do? What did I just spend the
exactly.
last 4 years doing?
Yeah,
And I think it took me a while too to like really believe it. Like when it was done,
yeah.
I was like, oh, I don't have to work on this paper anymore. It's done.
Right,
It's
right.
done. And I actually remember going through the same thing with my master's, not
Yeah.
as significantly, but I remember like those feelings of like, what am I going to do after this? Like, do I know how
Mhm.
to not be a student? Do I know what I really want to do next? Or am I still on the fence? So,
Yeah.
it's kind of still like at a crossroads, like that feeling of like being a little lost.
Exactly, and that's actually kind of leads me exactly to what I was gonna ask next, like, when you took that year off after your master's, it's kind of like you took a year off for sure, but I feel like because it was just 1 year, you might have maybe been in the mindset like, "Oh, it's kind of just like, you know, like an extended summer vacation or something," right? Like, you knew you were gonna go back to school, so it wasn't like it maybe didn't hit you right in the moment of like, "Oh, I'm done. Like, I'm no longer a student." So, after you finished everything with your PhD, what was that transition like? Like, how was the adjustment going from being a student for, since you were a child, with kindergarten all the way up till then? Like, how was that adjustment for you?
I honestly think it's like still an adjustment to me.
Okay.
I mean, I think being in the position of like being an educator, a part of me always feels like a student because I view it from all lens. Like, okay,
True.
how are my students going to take this content? How are they going to perceive this and understand this? So I think that has helped in the adjustment process. But kind of just like thinking back, like, oh, this time, like 2 years ago, I was sitting in class and doing XYZ, and
Mhm.
really just having those like points and those moments of reflection really brings it all back to me because I'm like, wow, and now I'm just teaching. Like I used to dream of the day where I was just teaching and I wasn't a student. But now there's like a part of me where I'm like, oh, I'm not a student anymore. Like I'm still adjusting to not having as many deadlines or not having to, be graded on something myself and not having to like present a big thing in front of my class to like do for my teacher for a grade. So I really think that's something I'm still adjusting to. I think that might take a little while,
Yeah.
especially because I don't know. I don't know if I ever will fully adjust to that, especially being an educator myself.
Yeah. That makes sense. And now you're currently an educator. That's your current role, and it was something that you worked hard to get to, and a dream and passion of yours. Is that kind of like, have you gotten to where you want to go with your
I
career and
don't
everything?
think so. I
Okay.
don't think so. I think I'm definitely on that path, but I can see so many opportunities that are like still on this path just down the way a little bit in regards to developing further as a teacher, but also just as an individual within a university and really contributing to a department even more. And that goes beyond teaching, but like also in research and
Yeah.
also in service positions that kind of benefit the university as a whole. Like there are so many ideas and opportunities there that now that I'm done being a student, I'm excited to kind of see how those play out, but also like tap into those a little more to see how I can further develop as an academic, but also kind of just as an individual trying to make a difference for the better.
Okay, that's awesome to hear. And so I think it was, I don't know, a couple days ago or a week ago or something, I saw that you are going to be speaking at an event or at a
Yeah,
school or something. Okay. So is that something, is like speaking engagement something that you've done before, or is this like kind of a newer territory for you?
I have done it, especially in my time as a PhD student. I
Okay.
would try to present at conferences as much as possible, just to, I mean, for the networking alone,
Yeah.
but really just to kind of, get used to that because it can be such a big part of being like a professor, especially when it comes to research and kind of getting involved in that realm. So I'm always super excited. This has never changed, like from the very first time I was accepted to a conference to even now, and I'm convinced it will never change because like it's just like, oh, I get to go and I get to talk about like my research and my work,
Yeah.
and I get to hear all these other great ideas, and I'll come home with 10 other things that I want to explore and do. And so it's like a huge mix of feelings of excitement and exhaustion because that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
So I get really excited with opportunities such as this because I really believe in kind of that open discussion and dialogue of sharing these ideas and networking and kind of just feeding off of each other so we can create something even better.
Yeah, I definitely think you and I were both the same kind of weird that enjoys that kind of stuff, that people listening are probably like, "What the heck? These are the craziest people I've ever heard of."
Probably.
Like, who wants to go to conferences and like present and like talk about research and all this stuff? And I'm like, "Yeah,
Probably.
sign me
Yeah.
up for that. That sounds fun."
It's so much fun. And
Yeah.
throughout my time, like as a student, like especially as my PhD, I would always try to collaborate with people. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, we can like do this and we can submit it and maybe get accepted and we can present and it'll be so much fun. And then like the looks I get are just like,
Yeah.
what? They're like, we have to do all of that. And I'm like, well, if you want, like I have like we can make this great idea and we can like submit it and it'll be super fun. And
Yeah.
it's just not the same approach for other people.
It's kinda eerie how much I'm hearing of myself when you're explaining things like that. I'm like, "Wow." That makes me think of all the times, like, in my master's where, like, I'm in group projects and I have this like whole like, "Oh, we're just gonna like do XYZ thing that's like way overboard," and they're like, "We literally just need like a one paragraph paper," and I'm like, "But
Right.
why not a PowerPoint and like a skit and like all this stuff?" And people are like, "Just no, stop." So I definitely I appreciate
I
the fellow
definitely believe in
academic.
having fun with it,
Yeah, I think it's
because
important.
it'll make it more enjoyable.
Exactly. It's like what I say for like working just in general. Like we all have to work to provide and, pay the bills and stuff. So we might as well have fun. And I think the same thing applies like when you're a student, like you're there for a purpose, obviously, to graduate and whatnot, but you should have fun while you're doing it, or at least try to, because if not, it's probably going to be a miserable process.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
So I know we kind of talked about the areas that you're teaching and everything have kind of these implications because of the way the last few years have been. And I just think back to like even being a student in 2020 to 2022, communication was just definitely different. And I always loved presenting. I love talking to people. I've always been an extrovert. But even like after being pretty much at home for a year or whatever, not really communicating with people, not really seeing face to face interactions, even for me, it was like an adjustment. Like, have you noticed that when it comes to teaching your students that like it feels different, like the way communication is being held than it was maybe a few years ago?
I do,
Okay.
absolutely. I think because a lot of what I teach involves like hands-on activities or, discussion and really
Mm,
open-ended discussion. So, I mean, first and foremost, really just hearing and seeing those different perspectives being
yeah.
applied to whatever we're talking about is drastically different because of everything that has happened in the last couple of years. So, I would definitely say that those perspectives have completely shifted how we view communication
Yeah.
because we are relying more on all of these different avenues, but we also have like a different opinion of them as well. And I think that absolutely varies for the individual, especially in regards to how personally impacted they were by the pandemic, for
Hmm.
example, as to how they view all of these different communication avenues, but how they even like personally analyze those in
Yeah.
terms of like maintaining their relationships and even being students. Like, I remember when the pandemic started, I had to switch everything to online. We were
Yep.
teaching online. And the course I was teaching was a new media course. And so being online, it wasn't that bad.
Right.
But going through that shift of like teaching from in person to online was really interesting to me because like looking back on it now, like that first quarter we had of teaching online was it was like exhausting in a sense, not just because we had to shift everything, but there was like, I feel like a grieving period for
Yeah.
all of my students. They were grieving something, whether that
Hmm.
was their social life, whether that was their education and how they knew it, whether that was something extremely personal going on with their family or loved ones, whether
Right.
it was just like their own personal way of trying to cope with the pandemic. So kind of becoming that support system online to like 30 plus students was like really eye-opening to me, and it's almost like I could see the shift in communication happening before my eyes as it was taking place. So
Wow.
kind of taking that experience and watching how communication has shifted over the last 2 years in regards to everyone's perspectives and also how they approach it has been like mind-blowing and also just super eye-opening.
Yeah. That, I mean, even just hearing you kind of like walk through that, I was like, it's really interesting to hear and to take on that perspective and see it from, a different lens. Over the last couple of years, I kind of saw it from the student perspective, but hearing it from, the academic, professor perspective from your end, I think that's really interesting. So, yeah, it was definitely a big adjustment for everyone involved, universities, and I mean, high schools, middle schools, all schools in general, and then the students, and then the instructors. It was just a big, kind of just unprecedented change that no one saw coming.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah,
to make all of those changes at the drop of a hat, it was just
exactly.
like, what is happening right
Right.
now? It was just chaos.
Yeah.
And I honestly feel, I mean, I feel like universities are still trying to get over that
Oh
chaos. Like
yeah,
they're still recovering from it. And
definitely.
so, yeah, it's been really interesting to be an individual in academia, whether that's a student, instructor, like
Hmm.
any role during this time, because
Definitely.
it's wild to see it play out.
It is for sure. Now, to anyone that's listening, Emily, that maybe they like communication, they find it interesting, or they're like, I am a terrible communicator. I need to get better at that. Do you have any like, I guess, and I know this might be a tough question to answer, but do you have any like tips or advice when it comes to communications on like things that the everyday person could be cognizant of or maybe try doing in their everyday communications?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the first thing when it comes to communicating well is listening well. So
Yes.
I spend a lot of time talking about this because when we think about communicating, we're like, I get to talk or I get to tweet, I get to text. So we think about all these things that we get to do, but there's so much value and meaning in just properly and thoroughly listening to what we're receiving. So
Hmm.
actively listening is absolutely step number one, whether that's with your teacher, your romantic partner, your friend. Like if you just took a step back to make sure you're mentally present, you're not distracted in any way, and you're genuinely comprehending the information being given to you, you will in turn be a much better communicator.
Yeah.
because you are just at complete understanding of what is being told to you or what you're reading and whatnot. That being said, I definitely think that in conjunction with listening, it's also just about being mindful. So, like, I feel like being a mindful communicator is super important, especially in this day and age,
Yeah.
in a sense of just like being really mindful and intentional about what you're trying to communicate and making sure you're doing so in a mindful way, even for that person receiving it. So,
Hmm.
those are kind of the two that I always like immediately go to when it comes to, being a good communicator and also just being aware of how you communicate because like we were just talking about, there's all of these different avenues of
Yeah.
communication now. So what I say on Twitter versus how I would say it in person might be completely different. So
Right.
being really mindful of how you're communicating on all of these different avenues.
Yeah, I think that those are great points, and the way that I kind of conceptualize those and how I guess, try to frame my communication and maybe I guess I am not really qualified to give advice to others, but, like, if ever anyone's like, "Oh, how can I be a better communicator?" I think it's exactly what you said of, like, there's a big difference between hearing something and listening to something.
Absolutely.
And I think, yeah, like you were saying, that active listening and really engaging and being present with it. And then the other big takeaway of just being mindful is like just the idea of impact versus intent, right? Like we might have good intentions when we communicate something, but we might communicate in a way that has an impact on another that isn't what we intended, but it impacts them negatively. And, it's not like we were trying to be mean or rude or anything, but we just have to be cognizant of the impact that our words can have on others.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned kind of like the way of communicating. So whether it's like you say something in person or you say something like through a tweet, and that kind of leads me to kind of like the segue of I know that you also are doing a bit of content creation. So like what got you into that journey and like what's your goals or aspirations with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the content creating has also always been like a freelance thing for me. So back when I was an undergraduate, it was about like small businesses that were like local versus I mean, I also did projects within my university as well.
Hmm.
And then so it's something that I've always kind of stuck with because I just love it. I mean, as a freelancer, I kind of have the ability to have this variety of projects. So I might be, designing and building websites, or I might be writing some things for a specific campaign, or I might be putting together a video. So I mean, it really has always just been I mean, it's essentially kind of like a hobby for me because I do
Okay.
enjoy it so much, but it also goes hand in hand really well with communication studies. So like I learn a lot either from teaching and research or from the content creating and they can like benefit each other. So I kind of just have like I appreciate it because it makes me a better teacher and a better researcher because I get that hands-on content creation and I'm able to see how that's being consumed or being received and how that goes out into the world, whether that's on a website, whether that's in a like a business email, whether that's on social media, and having that different perspective kind of just
Hmm.
makes me a better teacher. So I
Yeah,
mean, it's really just like it's like a hobby, but it's an extremely beneficial one for me.
that's really interesting because like what you said makes perfect sense. But I guess like thinking about it prior to this conversation, I was just thinking like they don't really go hand in hand really, but I like content creation, you're essentially communicating. That's what you're
Exactly.
doing. Like everything, every aspect of content creation is communicating a message, communicating a brand, communicating an idea, a
Absolutely.
personality, whatever. So it's like that's perfect. And like you said, it's kind of that like field hands-on work that's helping you with the theoretical, with the academics, and it's just like the best of both worlds.
It truly is, especially because when it comes to like teaching, like I said, with my research concentrations, I'm always kind of in the sphere of interpersonal relationships, media studies, or health comm. So to be able to have that hands on experience that kind of gives me experience with like business comm or sports
Hmm.
comm or, strategic communication or organizational communication or even like rhetoric, like I really appreciate that because I get to learn more about my discipline
Yeah.
and I get to apply it to all of these other like theories and foundations and ideas
Mhm.
that I learned along the way. I just didn't really like foster a development in them. So
Sure.
they do really go hand in hand because I mean, like you said, it's all communicating. So
Yeah, I
I
love that.
actually really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So now to pivot to the fun topic, football. So you said specifically college football. Where did that passion come from?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Honestly, that's just how I was raised.
Okay.
So, I mean, both of my parents love sports. Both of my parents love football. My dad, I feel like, was always kind of more NFL professional football, but my mom was she always had a heart for college football. And I
Okay.
remember the way she used to talk to me about it. It was just like instantly captivate me because she would talk about it with such genuine love and like passion that I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what I want to watch. Like that's what I want to focus on. That's what I want to talk about." And so that from a young age really just fostered this love that I have for college football. And I love like reading debates on like how people are like, oh, I prefer NFL over college football, or I prefer college football over NFL. And I completely respect those opinions. But like I always just go back to like, God, why do I love college football? And I always go back to like her kind of introducing it to me.
Okay.
And it's a completely like sentimental, like emotional thing for me that's developed into this passion. And it was always the Oregon Ducks from the beginning. So it's just something that I grew up with, and it's what I'm familiar with and what I know, and that love has only gotten stronger with time.
I mean, if you're gonna support a team, I don't think you can go wrong with the Ducks. That's a good team to pull for. They're usually historically, at least in my lifetime, they seem to have always been a really good program.
It is a good program to be a fan of, but I'm probably the wrong person to ask.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, let alone I mean, I will argue this. I will die on this hill that we have the best college mascot in all of college football. I don't think you can go wrong
Uh,
with it. I mean, the duck is the best.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm kind of partial to Akron. The Zips, the kangaroo is pretty cool.
Okay, he's pretty cool. He can be number two. That's fine.
Okay. Okay. There we go. We can agree on that.
Yeah, there
Perfect.
you go.
Do you have a favorite Oregon football player, whether that's current or past player?
Ooh, I have many favorite
Okay.
players. I mean, yeah, you can go back to, I mean, you can go back to Joey Harrington. You can talk about Dennis Dixon, LaMichael James. I mean, there's so many along the way that I
Hmm.
had like such love for during and even after their time at Oregon. I think Marcus Mariota will always be at the top of my list just because of not only being a great individual and a great football player and everything he brought, but everything he brought to Oregon. So,
Hmm.
you know, the Heisman, the Rose Bowl, going to the national championship. I mean, I look back on that season, the 2014-15 season, with such love, even though we lost in the national championship. But
Yeah.
everything leading up to that, I can think back like so fondly on it. And it's just like such great memories. And the fact that it's just tied to him. So I always have him at the top of the list, but
Okay.
honestly, there are so many favorites that I could probably talk to you about it until, you know, midnight. So,
I love that. Yeah, I mean, very good list. Definitely took me back with some of those great players, and I think Mariota is. I mean, I had phenomenal memories just watching him in his prime back at Oregon, and now Penei Sewell on the Lions. I'm
yeah.
a Lions fan, unfortunately, a Lions fan, but
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Good for you.
thank you. I'm from Michigan, lived here all my life, so you know, the unfortunate bad luck Lions fan. But Sewell is fantastic, and um, I was happy when he got drafted by the Lions, and I know that like preseason and like maybe the first game or two, like, oh, this was a terrible pick. He's such a bust, but now he's like arguably one of the best tackles in the league. So
Right. Yeah, no, it's so much fun. It's so much fun watching Oregon Ducks in the NFL.
yeah.
So him definitely being one. Obviously Justin Herbert,
Oh my
Kayvon
gosh, yeah.
Thibodeau. I mean, even Marcus at Atlanta now. Like it's so much fun watching them. And yeah, I think that's great. It's so funny how like fandom works, right? Like it
Yeah.
can take one game for you to completely switch your opinion on a player. and
Yeah.
like go from thinking so negatively to so positively. But it's just an interesting perspective we have as fans.
It really is, and it's one of those things, like, when you I think when you step back and, like, look at what it's like to be a sports fan, it's such a wild experience. Like, just to like, the thoughts that we have as fans, like, how
Yeah, they're
invested we
not
get in,
always the
like
most rational.
exactly, yeah, it's just so weird, and, like, I mean, obviously, like, I'm not saying we're extreme in, like, a negative extent, but, like, something that I've talked about just, uh, in, like, past episodes and just in my personal life is, like, the psychology of sports in terms of, like, you know, I don't know, let's say Oregon's kicker misses a game-winning extra point or something. It's like that kid's now getting, like, potentially death threats or, like, people are booing him, and it's we're adults, and, like, some people are, seriously wishing, like, bad things on this person over a game. It's crazy.
Yeah, the psychology of sports fans is absolutely, it's just so wild and it
Yeah.
can be so ridiculous. And I also think it's really interesting. I mean, not to necessarily go back, but like in my with my topic and my concentration of interpersonal
Yeah.
relationships, something I always had like argued and talked about was like the interpersonal dynamics of fans and how they connect to one another
Mhm.
and how they kind of feed off of each other,
Yeah.
whether that's positive or negative. And it's just like something really interesting that I think is probably like really tied to that, like that psychology of being a sports fan.
Yeah, definitely, and I think, based on what you're just sharing, it takes me back to, like, anytime I've ever been to a sporting event, it's like whether I'm there, with a friend or, whoever, if that other person isn't, like, as passionate as I am about the sport, it's like, if I start to get excited and I start, like, high-fiving the people next to me, it's like the person that I'm with, like, seems to suddenly get more amped up or more excited about it, and it's just like you said, we kind of feed off each other as fans, and, like, I mean, I can think of times where I've been at games and I've, like, the person I'm next to, you probably would think is, like, my best friend, and, like, I don't even know
Right.
this person because like, you just there's such, like, that camaraderie that, like, comes out of it.
There absolutely is, though. Like, you can go to a sporting event and like make an enemy or make a best friend. Like, it's
Exactly.
just so funny how that works.
Yeah, it really is, and I think, like, it's interesting, I don't know, maybe it's just the academics in us, but I think of, like, how that has to do with communication, and I did my undergrad in psychology, so, like, I think of, like, the psychology of where that comes in and stuff, and
Yeah.
it's just, like, it's so fascinating. People are just so interesting.
They really are. I think it's honestly, it's like that root of togetherness. Like we're
Yeah.
in this together. We have this like
Mhm.
common interest. We have this common passion. Therefore, we
Exactly.
know we're going to connect on at least one thing. And that one thing is enough for many people because you're at a
Yeah.
sporting event, you're cheering for the same team. But I always thought it was kind of like, yeah, it just goes back to this idea of togetherness and kind of
Mhm.
like the support we feel within that. So it's like, oh, we're in this together. So that already feels supportive because I'm not by myself. And we're
Exactly.
in this together and we have this like this common passion and we have like we're rooting for the same team. Therefore we can kind of support each other in, the good and the bad. So yeah, it definitely ties back to that like that psychology, which is
Yeah.
super interesting.
100%. I mean, I think, like, whether take a second to think about it or anyone listening, like, at the root of who we are, I think everyone just wants to feel like they belong somewhere within
Yeah.
their family, within their friend group, within their university, within their fraternity, sorority group, ever. Like, we all just wanna feel like we belong and have that sense of belonging, and I think it's like, at sporting events is one of those unique places where, like, all the walls come down. Like, it doesn't matter if, like, you feel completely isolated in your personal life. If you're in a stadium cheering for the same team as everyone else, like, feel like you're a part of something, and, like, it's just kind of like a magical experience, and I think it's something that I don't know. I know that, like, not everyone's a sports fan, but I think, like, if you're not a sports fan, like, there's some activity or something that you're interested in that, like, you could probably get the same feeling or, like, what we're saying makes sense just in a different capacity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. It's kind of like we just want to belong. Like
Mhm.
I've been to Oregon games where we've lost and like walking out with Oregon fans, there's just something that has brought even like a tiny bit of comfort to me because it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're sad too." Not that I want you to be sad,
Right.
but you right now in this moment, you really understand why I'm sad. And
Yeah.
that just feels a little bit better.
Yeah,
So, yeah, absolutely.
definitely. So, Emily, one of the last things that I wanted to talk to you about is you kind of mentioned early on about how kind of like the way that you were brought up and raised kind of is the idea of like cultivating kindness came from. So it sounds like it's something that's always been kind of like a pillar in your life, but can you just talk a little bit about like why that's so important and just what cultivating kindness means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. It was kind of just a way that I was brought up. I mean, particularly by my mother, because she just has like this philosophy on life that, if you're bringing kindness or sparking joy, then you're gonna touch someone at some point. You're gonna like
Mhm.
bring them a little bit of happiness or a lot of happiness. So it's kind of something that I feel like I experimented with like growing up, like all the way well into adulthood, like just comparing different situations to others and really like realizing like, oh, these were moments like even when I like sparked my own joy, like these were moments that like I really remember or that I can reflect upon fondly. And so it kind of just has always brought me perspective. Like if I'm able to do this and I'm able to at least like make someone smile or I'm able to kind of bring joy to someone even if it's short-lived, like hopefully that will make their day better. And there's just something about that that just makes me feel better. So it makes me feel, happier. It sparks joy with me as well. So it's kind of always been this thing that I've just like carried on and really every role of my life. Like I remember when I was even a graduate assistant in my master's program, like all the students that I worked with, I tried to like you know, cultivate kindness or like bring
Mhm.
that kind of philosophy into the classrooms. And it was just always really well received. Like it opened them up more. Not like maybe some days they felt happier, but at the very least, they felt like it was a safe place for them
Yeah.
to maybe be sad if they had to be sad. Like there was someone there who like was being mindful and compassionate towards that. So really it kind of ties maybe to what we were just talking about belonging. I think it can foster environments of belonging because even if I go into a classroom and try to spark joy or try to like make them smile, if I don't like have an impact such as that, hopefully they at least view it as a safe place, like okay,
Mhm.
I can be happy here, or I can be sad, or I can be quiet, shy, like whatever I'm feeling in this moment. It kind of just opens up that opportunity to provide that person with whatever that is. So, this is actually something that I practice on Twitter all the time that
Right.
you may know. Like I'll ask people like what brought you joy today or like what made you smile today. And it's not that I'm expecting thousands of people to respond. I'm not even expecting people to really look at it, but it's the people who maybe really need it in that moment. Or maybe they want a space to tell me, hey, I didn't have a good day. Or, hey, I saw this really cute dog on my walk and that actually made me smile. It provides them with that space to reflect on anything that they want to in that moment. And that can either make them, a little happier reflecting on that, or it can kind of just provide them with the space to tell me, like, hey, I didn't have a good day. But it gives them someone that's listening to them. Like, I'm reading these, like, I'll
Yeah.
respond. And I kind of just like to provide that space, especially like in the realm of social media where we're fed a lot of negativity constantly anyway. Like, I kind of always figured, like, yeah, I mean, if it's annoying, they can unfollow me. And I get that. Like it might be super annoying at times, but on the other hand, there might be someone who really needs it. So that's kind of what keeps me going.
I love that. I think that that's amazing, and I've definitely have taken notice to what you're saying about just, like, asking those questions of, like, "What has brought you joy today?" and things like that, and, I mean, that's honestly I mean, I guess I can't say with 100% certainty, but I'm pretty sure that's how I was able to connect with you. I think it was just, like, I've gotten to the point in my life where I've said, social media and life in general, it can get negative, it can be heavy. I want to intentionally surround myself with positivity and things that are going to fill up my bucket, if you will. And when I saw kind of like that unique, I guess, approach, or just like the way that you interact in terms of like asking those questions, like what brought you joy, what brought you happiness today, I was like, that's really cool, because it's like it's encouraging conversation about the good things, or just providing the space to articulate what you're feeling or what's going on, and just to know that you're being heard and seen, and your thoughts or feelings are being validated, I think are super important. It's like you never know, like that, what to like tweet that takes you like 5 seconds, but like you could
Right.
have just like impacted someone's whole day, week, month, year, and you don't
Yeah.
even know it. So it's like I think that's the cool thing about what you're doing, and just like the idea of cultivating this, because I think like, not that people in general like were rude, but I think the way that we live life these days is so fast paced that it's very easy to go to the same takeout restaurant or go to the same laundromat every day and not like ask the person how they're doing or even know their name. But if you just like take a step back and say like, "Oh, how's your Friday going?" and like
Yeah.
actually having like a genuine conversation, like it makes a big difference.
It does. And I mean, as you were talking, I kind of made this connection. It really just goes back to being mindful, because
Yeah.
really at the end of the day, we have no idea what's going on in the lives of others behind closed doors. And we don't really know what people need. So providing opportunities to that they might need, I
Hmm.
just think is really important. And like I said, like I understand the concept of like toxic positivity, if
Sure.
you will.
Yeah.
Like, I absolutely understand that. And that's kind of why like I really welcome and cherish even the responses I get that aren't positive, like they're just honest,
Yeah.
because at least I'm providing, or hopefully I'm providing a space, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's as a teacher, an educator, whatever space I'm in. Hopefully, I'm just providing a space that people feel comfortable, like
Exactly.
feeling whatever they're feeling.
Yeah, I think it's it's funny because I feel like anytime I get the chance to like plug my favorite psychologist, I always do. So here's my little plug for my psychologist of the day. Psychologist's name is Sidney Gerard, and he basically has this like theory that we all just want to be our full authentic selves, and like the vast majority of people, we would just like essentially put on a mask throughout the day. And we act in a way that we think like our friends want us to be, or our family expects us to be, or society thinks we should be, but like we're not always authentic and genuine to ourselves. And I think that like what you're saying is really resonating with me, because it's the idea of like creating that space in whatever capacity that is, whether it's social media, whether it's in person as an educator, whether it's at your place of work, whether it's, you know, at school if you're a student, just like providing that space for people to be their authentic self. And it's not like you said, like with your example of in the classroom, like you don't necessarily need to make every student that you see that day smile or laugh or whatever, but just like the idea that you want them to feel comfortable to know like they can be themselves in that moment, or like if they're feeling burnt out because it's, midterms, or if they're feeling, really anxious because it's coming up on, a break, and their at home life is a little rocky right now, just like that they can be themselves and show up and not have to put on that mask and just be authentic. I think it just makes such a difference. And it's like if we can provide that for people a little more mindfully as a society as a whole, I think it's making such a big impact and positive difference on so many people's lives.
Absolutely. I think that was beautifully said.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I definitely appreciate what you're doing for, the students that I probably will never come across or meet, but also just like the kind of shared space on social media that I kind of, I'm grateful to kind of see the community that you've developed there, and just like to see the positivity that you spread there. And I think you do a good job of not making it, toxic, or not being overkill with it, but just doing the appropriate length of providing that space. I think it's really important, and I think you're doing a great job of it. So keep it up.
Oh, thank you so much. I
Of
really
course.
appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So, to anyone that's listening that wants to check out kind of like that community that I mentioned on Twitter and see what you're doing, or, hear your thoughts on Oregon football, that's going to be the best place to find Emily. So that's, what is it?
At
Do you mind saying it?
Yeah, no, I'm totally fine saying it.
Okay.
At Emily E. Taylor 23.
That's what I thought it was. That's what I thought it was, but I was like, Is there an E in the middle? I can't remember.
There
So,
is an E in the
okay.
middle. Yep.
All right, perfect. So Emily's Twitter. So I definitely think that that's a great place if you are a college football fan and you want to talk or hear about college football, especially if you're an Oregon Ducks fan. Or again, like I was just saying, if you want to find someone on social media who is positive and who is a genuine person that just creates the space that we all need and gives that kind of sense of belonging that we all kind of desire and want to feel included with. Emily's a great person to connect with on Twitter, and I'll also put her Twitter in the episode description, so you can go there as well to find it and just connect with her that way and let her know if something that she said on this podcast really resonated with you. I'm sure she'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to connect.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Emily, is there any last thoughts, message, words, anything that you want to share with the people listening today?
I mean, really just like thank you for listening. This was so much fun, Zach. I really appreciate the opportunity. And as always, cultivate kindness.
I love it. Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of it. It was an absolute pleasure and blast having you on. And as Emily said, just remember, no matter where you're at in life, no matter what you're doing, just make sure you're cultivating kindness.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Bye.